It was time to apply the clear coat. What you're seeing here is my first attempt, and my first attempt was awful. I had set my gun up to dispense way too much clear coat at once, and what ended up happening was a disaster of drips and sags that I had to sand back, none of which I taped. Eventually I figured out what was wrong, and I adjusted the gun so that future layers went on the way they were supposed to. Ultimately, I did about 6 coats of clear. It was time to start the buffing and polishing process, so the first thing I needed to do was remove my body painting jig here, and I had masked part of the neck pocket with some blue tape. It took me a little while to get this tape off. The reason I'm showing it is because I really wanted to have a nice clean edge, and I didn't want to pull up any of the clear coat. So I'm using a technique that I believe was described by Ben on one of his videos, where you pull the tape away at a 45-degree angle so that you don't pull up any of the finish or the paint. Now, I'm starting the wet sanding process here, and I've watched a lot of tutorials on how to do this, and they all say that you should start with something like 1,000 grit sandpaper, and then work your way up to 1,500 grit sandpaper and sand away all of the 1,000 grit lines, and then go up to 2,000 grit sandpaper and sand away all the 1,500 grit lines. I don't do that. I've always found that it's very difficult for me to tell when the higher grit sandpaper lines are gone. So I always start now with 2,000 grit sandpaper, and it may require a bit more sanding on my part, but I find that when I get to the polishing stage, when I'm using the buffer and polishing the guitar, I'm not left with scratch marks from the higher grit sandpapers. It's much easier for me to get that glass-like finish this way. So my process is to sand using a sanding block and water, and I sand for a bit, then I wipe away the water. I look to see if there's any more orange peel, and if there is, I continue sanding until the orange peel effect is gone. And I do this all over the body, front, back, and sides. Now what I'm using here is a car buffer. This is a car buffer with a 3-inch pad from Griot's Garage. I love this thing. I've never gotten finishes to look as good as I have using this buffer. It's very easy to move around. It's adjustable speed. I'm using a multi-purpose compound to remove the 2,000 grit scratches, and the end product is just gorgeous after using this. Again, I'll buff for a little while, then I'll take a rag, I'll wipe away the compound to see if there are any remaining scratches. If there are, I continue to buff until I can get out as many of the scratches as possible. This is a little jig I created to more easily do the sides of the guitar. I've essentially made a buffing wheel out of the car buffer by C-clamping it to a sawhorse, which allows me to have both hands free to control the body, and I can get really good fast coverage of the edges on the buffing pad this way.